this talk is about Facebook. In fact, it's not just about Facebook, it's about a lot of media platforms, social media platforms, and how they interconnect. Let me, a little bit about myself. I'm a physicist, but I have a team that tries to combine together different disciplines. It's not easy. It's not easy for them listening to me. And likewise, it can be a challenge. So I want to explain my perspective before I go on and present the information. So it's almost, I guess, depending where you are in the world, it's coffee time, tea time or something. Let's think about some water boiling just for a second to explain where I'm coming from in terms of the view. Water boils, we know that, we can observe it. Imagine that's the analogy for what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand some huge system where stuff is going on in one part of it, and we can collect data. So it's an unfortunate fact that you could track every molecule. You could know everything about the water molecule. You could know, you could try and track hundreds of thousands or millions of water molecules, but you would never understand why water is boiling. In fact, you could build agent-based models of water molecules. You could build, which are used for some of the calculations for the R number, of course, as we know in epidemiology. I think it's in the Imperial College, one of the Imperial College models. Or you could take a kind of collective view, take differential equations, the typical kind of SIR, couple differential equations. It doesn't matter how complicated you make them, you are not going to be able to explain why water boils, because the missing ingredient is how the molecules are actually correlated together, how they do things like form bubbles. And it's the fact that bubbles can appear out of nowhere, clusters of correlated objects. That is what boiling is. And there's a very successful theory, this is my perspective where I come from, based on how you explain those correlations and how they're connected to each other. So it's part of network science, but it's also part of something called statistical physics. In fact, the two go hand in hand, and it builds a theory of how water boils. In fact, it's not just the water boiling in this cup, it's in the glass, doesn't matter where you boil it, it does the same thing. And that to me is the goal of where, at least in our work, we're trying to aim. What principles, what science can you extract for infodemics that A, is general enough that can, and quantitative, of course, got to be quantitative, general and quantitative that it can be tested and used in different settings, but not so general it doesn't say anything. So here's our attempt so far. So what I'm going to tell you now is, just in the time left, is about a paper that just came out that we had in Nature, looking at just the vaccine. When I look at not the equivalent of water boiling, but the vaccine topic boiling out on the internet, on Facebook, we're going to look. What does it look like? So I don't expect you to read through this. I'll go straight into discussing what we found. It's a very important point what Anya made about, and some of the other speakers about Facebook. I want to show you, before we go and look at the results, what does it actually look like, the conversation within one of these quote unquote bubbles or clusters of people. Now, clusters of people don't appear on Twitter because there's no inbuilt kind of clustering. I mean, Facebook has groups, it has pages. Other platforms have a kind of, even down to Discord, the gaming channels, gaming platform has chat as servers. So the idea that social media provides a clustering mechanism, in other words, a way that people can become correlated, is absolutely key to the science, in our opinion. So what is actually happening in this discussion around online communities? And this gets us, this is the first lesson that we learned. It's like, wow, actually misinfo, disinfo, it's actually hard to sometimes to work out what's going on. This is a really kind of typical two-way conversation on a Facebook page where they're getting into, it may be a parent. In fact, this comes from a pet lovers. Facebook page, where they suddenly got off to talking about vaccines for their pets and then into children. This was getting around COVID, future COVID vaccines. So one saying, oh, the big issue here in the US, of course, can you get an exemption? Should you have an exemption for the school system? And then somebody replies out of nowhere, this could be someone that they trust because, they'd explained about their dog or something. So there's trust in this community, in this cluster, this Facebook page. But then they come out with this wild statement. What does that look like in the bigger spectrum? This is another Facebook page. This is really a kind of an anti-vaccination Facebook page. I had to cover it up just because I don't, because it identifies, but there's a lovely picture of a baby's hand in the back. I mean, it's very all cozy. And there's the CDC banner up there with looking unfortunately quite bland. And one size fits all. And then they're off actually discussing what I'm going to talk to you today about. They're discussing our paper. So our paper that came out in Nature, the report on it in Science, and they go back and forth about don't I, basically that we sort of messed up because we don't realize that people are converting, or that's not that we messed up, but our statement about the undecideds being a key role in this. It's not just, the the kind of government message or the establishment message or science message and the anti, it's the undecided, it's kind of hearts and minds that's actually the key to this. That's what our paper showed. That's what I'm going to go on and talk to you about. And they're going on saying, don't they realize this? We all knew that, et cetera, et cetera. But I just show you this because, none of this really here is misinformation or disinformation. They're getting their base together around the discussion of our paper. Unless our paper's misinformation, I hope it isn't. So let me go on and talk to you about what we actually did. You're looking at what we hope is the first estimate of a map of the entire Facebook discussion, at least on pages. It's absolutely important point. I'll get to that in a minute in relation to groups, but on pages, each dot is a page that in some way has become involved with the vaccine discussion. On Facebook, this is the first kind of map. I see it as a kind of almost like it's like those early maps of continents where, Europe's in the wrong, or, or Africa's in the wrong place. It's connected where it shouldn't be. But this is our first attempt. So you're actually looking at around 100 million people. If we add up everybody who's in these pages, across all of these dots, each of which is a cluster of people, a Facebook page. It's up to 100 million. And we didn't expect to see this. We expected to see a kind of core blue surrounded by, it's almost like a strong blue, so surrounded by kind of reds, anti-vax Facebook pages kind of buzzing around like, bees around a hive. And then the background population, just, the pet lovers, the parents associations of schools, etc. These other Facebook pages just sort of off in the distance. But that's not what we found. That is not what we found. We found a really strong red core, which is highly entangled with the greens, who are the pet lovers, the parents associations. But not only is the red connected to them, they're connecting back into the red. In fact, the black circles are ones that are, most, and you can see most of them agree, they're the pages that have most connected into other pages. I could talk about what the connections are later, but it's basically when there's a strong page link by the administrator or at the top level of the page into another page. So they're actually more likely to get the feed from that other page. So if I'm on a green group, if I'm a parents in the center of one of these, on one of these clusters, and I'm linked to a red page, I'm going to get some of that stuff. So it acts like a link. What we didn't expect to find then is the blues are really engaged. So Gates Foundation is the big blue blob at the top, but they're almost like off in, they're off to the north. In fact, it's almost like they're fighting in the wrong battlefield. And so even though, and you can see in the bottom right, even though the total number of people in the blues is actually larger, because they're in these kind of blocks, these kind of central clusters that talk a lot to each other, but are not engaged with the reds, and the reds are kind of divided into these reasonably small clusters, it's like the reds are winning this battle. And I know I shouldn't, but the word battle is not seen well, but I don't know how else to describe it. So where are these clusters actually in the world? They're everywhere. They're everywhere. As Anya said, the penetration of Facebook is huge. Outside in many countries. And on the top left, I've just shown you a projection of some of them. If we projected all of them, you wouldn't see the world with all of those lines. And a lot of the clusters, interestingly, we have this thing called a global ether. They're ones that they're ones that identify as a global cause. So they don't. So we've got on the left in Canada, you've got Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, and really local page talking about local doctors who like to who are for delaying vaccines, connecting into some global group or straight into a group in Australia. So this enables us so it's not just about mapping. The thing is not to just map. This is not some map projected on a globe, projected and constrained by some sphere. This is a map where it's a self-organized layout where these clusters. So you can think of this. I can't avoid saying a physics thing. Imagine each of these things like a ball, and the link is a spring. If you just let this thing free on the ground to arrange itself, this is what it would look like. There's no constraint. So when things look close, it's because they're linked. When things are far, it's because they're unlinked. And that is the only way that I personally think we can go about trying to understand it. So on this, you're seeing the change during 2019 of the new links they created. And you can see that red, I couldn't even resolve in to see the individual lines in red. They're so dense. And you can see red actually creating new links up towards the blues. Yes, the blues have actually tried to create links into the reds. However, you can see that, if you were to judge this and you knew nothing about vaccines and you didn't even know what this study was, you just thought this is some kind of game you were watching, you'd think that red was in a good position. But having this, so what does this give us? What this gives us is a way to start looking at what in epidemiology, what in the standard models of epidemiology, the ones that are used to discuss flattening the curve, the ones that are used to discuss an Arnhem, what pieces of those models work and what are invalid. And I can immediately tell you that the invalid part is to do with so-called mass action. Even models that in epidemiology where we segregate people and start to think about commutative, yet there's still an averaging over time. There's still an averaging over time, and there's a mass action, at least, in other words, there's kind of little test tubes that are connected together. And from what we see, and I could take you through the details, but just have to take my word at the moment for it, what we see is these links can be changing on the same time scale as the material is passing. And that is a regime of epidemiological modeling that is just not tackled because it's so hard. And you don't actually need it probably for a lot of things in real epidemics, although that's open to debate as well. So I'm going to focus in, what does this give us? Let's look at what kind of theories we can develop, or what we need to develop to describe this type of system. So I would talk to you about what we're working on exactly now, which is an online R number. We're just about to submit this for consideration to a journal. We've derived an online version of R, which isn't just it doesn't just account for, you know, if we all kind of stay static for a while, what's the number of people we infect? Or if I average over my movements in a day, what's the number of people I infect? That gives me basically, that's the R number. It treats the viral spreading on the same time scale as the network is changing. And that is absolutely crucial. In other words, basically a day or so, a few days. That's the scale on which these links are changing. That's the scale on which material gets passed around. So I won't take you through all this. Hopefully we're going to explore this explore these kind of ideas. I'm not saying that our ideas are the ones to explore, but we're going to explore these kind of ideas in the topic discussions that we're going to have. But just to share with you that the challenge, the scientific challenge, the mathematical challenge, that whatever discipline you want to think of it, in fact, it's not just one discipline, of creating models and descriptions where the viral material passes on the same time scale that the network changes is huge. So once we have these, so I'm going to move, getting towards the end now. Anya, great discussion about LDA. Once you have then that red, green, blue, yeah, but what are they talking about? So we now looking more into the content of, and therefore how does content relate to linkage? How does content relate to linkage, and linkage relate to position in that, that map I showed you? And then we look across platforms, because it's one thing to think about one platform, Facebook, but there is a whole bunch of other platforms. And what can happen is that material gets chased off of Facebook, goes into another platform, gets picked up, passes around, comes back in. On the right is our networks that we showed, and even back in the 19th of December on 4chan, there was already discussions about a kind of pneumonia that was being, I mean, we could go into the detail, but pneumonia that was being reported in certain regions in China. Of course, you know regions, but in Wuhan, around Wuhan. And this probably came from friends of doctors there, just putting out on 4chan. 4chan, it goes straight into Telegram. Telegram goes into Gab. Gab goes into Facebook. Chase it off of Facebook, it does the reverse and then comes back. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know we're behind time. Again, I want to thank all of you. Fantastic talks, Anya and Saz.